A father stands before cameras in the middle of unimaginable loss, not asking for justice, not demanding answers, not assigning blame. Instead, he says thank you. He thanks strangers he has never met. He thanks law enforcement, investigators, volunteers, and the community. He speaks about unity, about love, about peace, and about the way his daughter, even in tragedy, brought people together not just locally, but across the country. His voice is steady, his words are grateful, and beneath them is a grief so deep it does not need to be explained. This is not the reaction many expect after a nationwide search ends in heartbreak. And it is precisely why his words stopped people cold. Because what Camila Mendoza Olmos' father said was not about how his daughter died. It was about how she lived, and about what silence can cost. Before we go any further, if you believe true crime, coverage should be fact-driven, respectful, and centered on humanity, not speculation. Take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from and what questions you believe still deserve careful, responsible answers in this case. Your engagement helps ensure stories like Camila's are handled with integrity, not noise. The word exposed can be misleading, especially in true crime. So before this story goes any further, it's important to be clear about what is being discussed here and what is not. This is not a story about hidden evidence being revealed. It is not about accusations. And it is not about drawing conclusions before investigators have finished their work. What is being exposed in this case is something far more uncomfortable and far more human. It is the emotional truth revealed through a father's restraint. In moments like these, grief often comes with anger, demands, and blame. But Camila Mendoza Olmos' father chose a different path. He used his voice not to point fingers, but to thank those who searched, those who prayed, and those who showed compassion to his family and his daughter. That choice matters, because in true crime, family statements are often misunderstood, misused, or twisted into narratives they were never meant to support. Here, his words are not evidence. They are not explanations. They do not answer questions about cause or responsibility. They do something else. They remind us that behind every investigation is a family absorbing loss in real time, and that how we talk about these moments carries weight. This story is not about exposing answers. It is about exposing how quickly grief can be turned into spectacle and why this case demands the opposite. With that distinction made, it becomes possible to understand why the father's words resonated so deeply and why they must be handled with care. In true crime coverage, family statements often become emotional shortcuts. They are quoted quickly, interpreted loosely, and sometimes treated as if they confirm what investigators have not yet said. That is precisely why Camila Mendoza Olmos' father's words matter, not because they explain what happened, but because they resist being used that way. His statements were not reactive. They were not accusatory. And they were not shaped by speculation. Instead, he spoke about unity, about faith, about the responsibility people have to speak up when they are struggling and to check in on one another before silence becomes irreversible. From an investigative perspective, this restraint is significant. Experienced investigators and ethical journalists understand that grief does not equal insight. A parent's words reflect love, pain, and memory, not forensic conclusions. By choosing gratitude over accusation, Camila's father avoided feeding a narrative that could distort an active investigation or harm others involved. There is also a broader reason his words resonated. They disrupted expectation. In moments of tragedy, the public often looks for someone to blame. His refusal to do that forced attention back to something quieter and more uncomfortable, the reality that not all losses come with immediate answers. And that patience is sometimes the most responsible response. His message was not about the manner of his daughter's death. It was about the value of communication, the danger of isolation, and the impact one life can have on many. That is why his words deserve careful attention, not as clues, but as context. To understand that context fully, it's necessary to step back from the investigation itself and remember who. Camila Mendoza Olmos was before her name ever appeared in headlines. Before search crews, press conferences, and national attention. Camila Mendoza Olmos was a 19-year-old young woman living at home with her family in Bay County, Texas. By all verified accounts, her life was not marked by instability or public warning signs. She was described by her family as close to her parents, particularly her father, who later spoke openly about the bond they shared. She lived in a residential area near local businesses and open landan environment that, until this case, had not been associated with danger or disruption. There were no confirmed reports of criminal activity, no public indication of ongoing conflict, and no verified information suggesting she had planned to leave or cut ties with her family. Her routines were ordinary. And it was precisely that normalcy that made her disappearance so alarming. In missing person investigations, abrupt changes in behavior often raise early concern. In Camila's case, there were no immediately visible red flags. Her daily life followed a familiar rhythm, one that did not suggest secrecy or distress. What stood out most to those who knew her was her sense of connection. Her father later described her as someone who brought people together, someone whose presence mattered. In the days following her disappearance, family members and supporters wore yellow, white, and green colors associated with Camila as a visible expression of solidarity and hope. Hundreds of people gathered, not because of notoriety, but because they felt connected to her story. This context is essential. True crime cases often become reduced to timelines and evidence lists, but Camila was not a mystery waiting to be solved. She was a daughter, a constant presence in her household, and a young woman whose absence was immediately felt. Understanding who Camila was before she vanished is not about romanticizing her life. It is about recognizing why her disappearance could not be dismissed as routine and why concern escalated quickly once she did not return home as expected. With that foundation in place, attention turns to the day everything changed and how an ordinary Christmas Eve became the start of an urgent and expanding search. The timeline of Camila Mendoza Olmos' disappearance begins on the morning of Christmas Eve. According to confirmed information, Camila was last seen leaving her home that morning. At the time, nothing about her departure appeared unusual. There were no reports of distress, no confirmed arguments, and no indication that she planned to be away for an extended period. As the day progressed, Camila did not return home as expected. Initially, her family attempted to account for her absence in ordinary ways, assuming a delayed errand or a change in plans. But as hours passed without contact, concern began to grow. Eventually, law enforcement was notified and Camila was officially reported missing. Once that report was filed, the situation shifted from a family concern to an active investigation. Investigators worked to establish Camila's last confirmed movements. Surveillance footage later became part of that effort, showing her near her home earlier that morning. Authorities were careful in how they described this footage. They did not suggest it showed a crime, nor did they imply it explained what happened next. It served as a timestamp, a fixed point, in an otherwise uncertain sequence of events. As time passed without confirmed contact, search efforts expanded. Family members, friends, volunteers, and law enforcement coordinated to canvass areas near her home and surrounding locations. The growing scale of the search reflected increasing concern that Camila's disappearance was not following a typical pattern. Despite these efforts, significant gaps remained. Where Camila went after she was last seen could not be confirmed. Whether she met anyone, changed direction, or encountered an interruption in her routine remained unknown. Investigators acknowledged these uncertainties publicly, recognizing that the absence of information was itself a critical part of the case. As multiple days passed, Camila's disappearance was no longer treated as a short-term absence. It became a critical missing person case, one defined as much by what could not be confirmed as by what could. And it was within the scope of that expanding search that investigators made a discovery that would move the case into a far more serious phase. As the search for Camila Mendoza Olmos progressed, investigators reached a point that required careful, deliberate communication with the public. During follow-up search efforts in an area not far from Camila's home, authorities confirmed that a body had been discovered. The location fell within the established search perimeter, an area that had been canvassed previously and revisited due to environmental conditions that can obscure visibility. From the beginning, law enforcement emphasized restraint. They did not immediately confirm the identity of the remains. They did not announce a cause of death. And they cautioned against drawing conclusions based on proximity or timing alone. What officials did confirm was limited but significant. The clothing observed at the scene was consistent with what Camila had last been reported wearing. A firearm was also found in the vicinity of the body. These details were shared carefully, without interpretation or implication. Importantly, investigators made clear that the presence of an object near a body does not establish how or why it was used. Determining cause and manner of death requires forensic examination, medical evaluation, and time. Those processes cannot be rushed without risking accuracy. Authorities further explained that visual consistency does not equal positive identification. Formal confirmation requires forensic methods conducted by the medical examiner. Until that process is complete, identity cannot be responsibly stated as fact. When asked whether foul play was suspected, officials did not eliminate or confirm any possibilities publicly. Instead, they stated that the investigation was ongoing and that conclusions would depend on verified findings. This approach reflects standard investigative practice. Silence or limited information at this stage is not secrecy, it is procedure. It is the difference between speculation and evidence. What remains clear is that investigators have been deliberate in defining what is known and in acknowledging what is still under review. That distinction matters especially in cases receiving intense public attention. As the forensic process continued, attention turned not to conclusions, but to the boundaries investigators set around what could responsibly be said and what they could not yet rule out. As investigators continued their work, Camila Mendoza Olmos' father stood the tales of the case itself. He did not speak about timelines or evidence. He did not speculate about cause or responsibility. Instead, he spoke about connection, about the importance of checking in on one another and speaking up before silence becomes permanent. He urged people to talk, to express what they are feeling, to recognize that someone nearby may be carrying more than they show. His words were not framed as answers to what happened to his daughter. They were framed as a warning about what can happen when communication breaks down. This message carries weight beyond this case. Far less attention is given to the moments that come before when intervention, conversation, or support might still be possible. By focusing on those moments, Camila's father redirected attention away from speculation and toward prevention. He also expressed gratitude to law enforcement, investigators, volunteers, and members of the community who searched, prayed, and stood with his family. That gratitude was not performative. It was steady and deliberate, even in the face of profound loss. From an analytical perspective, this response reinforces an important truth. Family members do not owe the public explanations. They do not exist to validate narratives or satisfy curiosity. When they choose to speak, their words should be received with care, not mined for meaning they were never intended to carry. The father's message does not replace the facts of the investigation. It exists alongside them. It reminds us that cases are not only about outcomes, but about the human cost that surrounds every unanswered question. And it also raises a difficult issue: how grief is often treated in true crime storytelling, and why this case demands restraint rather than narrative exploitation. True crime has a long history of turning grief into momentum. Emotional statements are clipped, replayed, and repurposed to suggest meaning they were never meant to convey. Pain becomes proof, silence becomes suspicion, and restraint is often mistaken for evasion. This case illustrates why that approach is not only flawed, but harmful. Camila Mendoza Olmos Flawless. His words were not designed to answer investigative questions, and they should not be treated as if they do. Using grief as narrative fuel risks distorting reality and compounding harm to families already navigating trauma. Responsible coverage requires discipline. It means resisting the urge to frame emotional testimony as revelation. It means acknowledging that some moments are not meant to move a story forward, but to remind us of the human cost behind it. In cases where investigations are ongoing, this restraint becomes even more critical. Speculative storytelling can interfere with fact-finding, influence public perception, and create pressure that benefits no one, not investigators, not families, and not the truth. This is why the distinction between empathy and interpretation matters. Empathy allows space for grief without assigning meaning. Interpretation, when unsupported by evidence, can mislead. In this case, the father's message deserves to be heard but not transformed into a conclusion. True crime, at its best, does not rush toward closure. It acknowledges uncertainty and respects the process required to resolve it. That uncertainty remains here. And understanding what is still unknown and why requires turning attention not to theories, but to the unanswered questions that investigators have yet to resolve. Despite the scale of the search and the attention surrounding this case, significant questions remain unanswered. Investigators have not publicly confirmed the precise sequence of events that followed Camila Mendoza Olmos' last known sighting, where she went after leaving her home, whether she encountered anyone, and how her movements unfolded remain under review. The exact circumstances surrounding her death have also not been formally established. Cause and manner of death depend on forensic evaluation, medical examination, and evidence analysis processes that require time and cannot be responsibly summarized in early statements. Authorities have not confirmed whether any individual involvement has been identified, nor have they announced conclusions regarding intent or responsibility. These are determinations that must be supported by verified findings, not inferred from proximity, timing, or emotion. Environmental factors, time elapsed, and scene conditions can complicate clarity. That reality does not indicate investigative failure. It reflects the complexity of forensic work and the care required to reach accurate conclusions. What matters at this stage is not filling the gaps with assumptions, but recognizing why those gaps exist. Each unanswered question represents a point that investigators must examine carefully, weighing evidence against what is still unknown. Rushing to assign, meaning risks overlooking details that could ultimately matter most. Patience is not passive. It is part of the process. As the investigation continues, updates will come when they are supported by confirmed information. Until then, responsible engagement means allowing space for uncertainty without turning it into narrative pressure. And as attention remains focused on what has not yet been resolved. It is important to return once more to the person at the center of this story, not the case, but the life behind it. Camila Mendoza Olmos' story did. Be waiting for how it ended. Before investigations, before press conferences, before unanswered questions. She was a daughter. She was a presence in her home. She was someone whose absence was immediately felt and whose life, by all verified accounts, followed a familiar and ordinary rhythm. That is what makes this loss so difficult to absorb. Her father's words remind us of something true crime often forgets, that not every story is about resolution. And not every tragedy comes with clarity. Some stories ask for patience. Others ask for restraint. And some ask us simply to remember the person before the headline. This case is still unfolding. Facts are still being examined. Conclusions have not yet been reached. And until they are, the most responsible thing that can be done is to hold space for truth without forcing it to arrive early. Camila's life mattered long before her name was known beyond her community. Honoring that life means resisting speculation, respecting process, and recognizing that dignity should never be sacrificed for attention. If you've followed this case, take a moment to reflect not just on what is unknown, but on what it asks of us as viewers. Responsible engagement means supporting verified information, allowing investigations to proceed without interference, and refusing to turn grief into entertainment. If you believe this kind of fact-driven, respectful coverage matters, like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. In the comments, tell us where you're watching from and what questions you believe still deserve careful, evidence-based answers without speculation. Your engagement helps ensure that stories like Camila Mendoza Olmos are handled with care, patience, and integrity. And above all, it helps keep the focus where it belongs, on the humanity at the center of every case.